Okay, and welcome back to the show. I'm your host Soli, and once again, I got a great topic suggested by tonight's guest, which is Brian Brutlag of the Sociologist Dojo. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm excited to talk about this trilogy.
Yeah, and this was a great change in pace, because usually we've done all kinds of things, gangster sagas, addicting TV shows, cult horror movies, and the typical sci-fi and action blockbusters that they made like a dozen of. And here that we didn't have so much of that. This time it was a matter of, hey, here's something that was kind of a romantic dramedy that just had like worldwide acclaim, and I learned a little bit about everything just prepping for this, and it was a good excuse to finally watch the final entry. I had seen the first two a while back, and then I had to finally catch up and watch this one.
Yeah, the final entry is really sobering, and I don't think a lot of people were ready for it that were fans of the first two, because it gets so real.
I could have seen it totally flopping back in the day because it wasn't happy. And
it really depends, kind of like the first film. It kind of depends on where you're at in your life and specifically how you feel about romance.
1,000%. How are you in personally, and how do you view this genre? And so did you see any of these in order? Because it was brought to my attention because so Before Sunrise aired in 95, set up the whole premise. Before Sunset was the sequel that got the same amount of acclaim, and then Before Midnight came out many years later in 2013, and they were produced by Castle Rock Pictures for Warner Brothers and Sony Pictures indie studio outlets. I had no idea. I mean, I'd seen Waking Life a while back, but I had no idea that the characters appeared in there in animated form. And it makes sense. It's a Richard Linklater joint, but I also didn't know that this was in the Criterion collection. So pretty cool.
Well, that's where I fell in love with it. I first became aware of Before Sunrise in the 90s because my older sister was really was into like Ethan Hawke, and so she watched it a couple of times. And
people forget, before he kind of became kind of the action guy or starring in some of these slashers, he was mainly just from a kid actor from Dead Poets Society and Explorers.
Yep. And so like I clocked that as being like, okay, that's interesting, but then I didn't really come back to it until I saw that it was going to have a Criterion edition coming out, and I'm in love with the Criterion collection just as cinephile and as a film fan. And then I bought the Criterion edition, and then I watched them all the way through. And this was about maybe 5 years ago, and it just swept me off my feet. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And it could have been I was sort of pushed by, over the last 10 years, being overly saturated with all of the sci-fi and the superhero and the beam of light that you got to fight, all of that sort of stuff. And here is a trilogy of films, a trilogy that is not only satisfying when each individual film
The Independent ranked it as one of its 10 greatest trilogies of all time last year,
because it lands the end, like it sticks the landing of the third film, in that the quality doesn't change of each film, that everybody is still on the same page from one film to the next. The consistency, the shot composition, everything echoes each other. And how many trilogies can you actually say that actually do that?
Not very. And it's just so hard to convince people that, yes, you can make a movie that doesn't rely on explosions or shock value or a plot twist that everyone talks about. And then the more you talk about it, you realize it doesn't actually work. And I just am getting so annoyed of how everyone seems to nowadays just feel like it must be an indie outlet from A24. It must be Christopher Nolan or M. Night Shyamalan kind of just gotcha. And it's just like, no, I don't need this at all. And
Well,
this
yeah,
has been
look
compared
at,
to Eric Romer, one of the French New Wave guys. And
yeah,
I
I
totally
mean,
understand that.
look at like Top Gun Maverick. Like everybody's going to see that
Yeah.
film, and it's just everyone's like, "This is so amazing! You need to see it in the theater." And my brain goes to, "Oh, there a film like Before Sunrise or Before Sunset or Before Midnight. It's going to have so much more difficult of a chance to actually be in the theater now."
Oh, yeah. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be necessarily. I mean, I loved how they noted how they couldn't get a cinema score rating. I'm like, I'm not surprised. I doubt it played. I'm pretty sure it played in like only the art house theaters in every city.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And like there were some like at the time, if you look at like the 90s for Before Sunrise, there were some heavy hitters all around it.
So many. Yeah.
Yeah, like the year before it was Three Colors White, Reality Bites, Four Weddings and a Funeral, The Crow with Honors. And then the year before Sunrise came out, it was like Circle of Friends, Muriel's Wedding, Rob Roy, While You Were
Bingo.
Sleeping, Empire Records,
About as close, I guess you could say, as you got maybe with mainstream indie, and it's technically not indie because it's a big budget movie. Was just seeing the likes of, uh, what's his name, who's married to Jamie Lee Curtis, Christopher,
oh, oh yeah. You're talking about the Christopher Guest.
yeah, Christopher Guest was doing all kinds of mockumentaries. Rob Reiner was doing just very witty character studies, and even Cameron Crowe was kind of the go-to for being romantic in historical movies, and so many others were doing all other kinds of crowd pleasers that you could at least, the studios could sneak in an award nom for best actor, and it could make decent money just off the amusing trailer alone and cable TV
Right.
airings. And it just seems like, this was just a good gamble by Linklater. He's clearly, and the fact that he invested, the actors in the screenplay and had moments of their lives, that just makes it all the more authentic. You feel pretty much like many of these indie films, like there's some great ones near the mid 90s to early 2000s that I admire that are very similar to this. There's Our Song, which has a young Kerry Washington as a music student. There's Girl Fight, which we just talked about the films of Karan Kusama on here. And then there's even, Wayne Wang's Smoke and a bunch of other films he's done. It has pretty much all of those kinds of elements of just only using montages to show like passage of time and complement the movie, as opposed to, like you say, relying on effects or fancy edits that don't actually contribute anything to the story. They're just a CSI type effect, and
Yeah. And like the long takes in
so many long
every
takes,
single film, like,
and you forget half the time. You're just so dialed into what they're saying. You want to know more about them. It's empowering, to say the least, because not everyone can do that. Not every actor can do a long take. Not everyone can have that presence that the camera just loves.
Oh, absolutely. Like I think they increase every single film. I think there's an 11-minute take in Before Sunrise, a 12-minute take in Before Sunset,
even the boat trip
13-minute
alone, and they're with other people, and it's just like they slowly start incorporating, like by the time you get to the third one, they're actually in public more often. It used to be they're just like in a corner or on a street walking.
And I remember Linklater saying in an interview that like you needed to see these two people with other people. Otherwise, it would just be like this weird fantasy between people. And it is part of the third film's really interesting pivot into a lot of relationship reality that makes some people uncomfortable.
There's that, and I mean, it had to be indie because if this had been a major studio production, you would have had to, yes, you would have had to change it up, make it a little more funny, add in some element that's known to be successful but isn't necessarily realistic because you know how producers get. You know, we were just talking politics before, but yeah, producers are even worse at. I just feel I'm going to lose money. It's just not going to land. It's like no, audiences really do want something that's not predictable. It's just it's hard to
Yeah,
do. It's hard to be motivated, especially if you keep seeing crappy results and have to pay your investors back.
well, I mean, yeah, that's the problem with Hollywood being reactionary. That's why you get the same thing happening
Reactionary.
over and over again. Is that, oh, this worked? This is great. This worked. Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to do that 10 more times, and
Mm-hmm.
then let's rake in the money. And so, like, for instance, if we're talking about Before Midnight, if this was a studio picture, you knew that both the ex-wife would have been a character and they would have had a couple scenes together.
They would have hired a big award winner who can give a speech that will win her another award. Yeah, yeah, it would have been
Yeah.
very Beatty as
And
opposed to, wow, I don't know who that person is, but they're really good actors. I really felt like I saw an actual argument, you know, or a love triangle instead of, oh, you know, commonplace by trope designs. There must be an argument in the third act, you know.
right. And the brilliance about Midnight is that you see the seeds of it in that car ride in the beginning of the
That's a
film.
great shot, isn't it?
Yeah.
You forget that there's even, you know, someone driving them or anything. You're just more like, okay, they're coming out of their shell. They're doing something that they're not sure they want to do and they're going to commit to it.
And the way in which the dialogue is as people talk, which is talk over each other, right? And the way that they actually are able to do that was so much rehearsal. I think that a lot of people thought that a lot of these films, these three films particularly, were all improv when it was so
It's easy to think
meticulous.
that they just weren't used to the style. If anything, they might have changed the line, you know?
Right. And it is that sort of like that conversational style that needs to be so rehearsed in order to get it exactly right.
Half the time, the rehearsals will even make it in there. And that's why they feel so natural. But yeah, it's tough to explain to people unless they know have friends who are into acting or they've done it themselves. And it's like you say, it's just kind of amusing too, in that you never really know if you know audiences are being taken out of it because it's not formulaic or if they just it's just they don't watch too many indie movies even though there was plenty of them in the 60s to the 80s and but yeah,
I
by the
mean,
90s it was a different type of indie already, you know.
it is really interesting to think about modern audiences. And yes, Midnight came out, what, 9 years ago, so it's not that long. But if modern audiences would get bored with the pacing of these particular films.
Yeah, i I mean, if studios were to start making this be commonplace, make that be like this, I'm not worried about it because generally indie wins out. I mean, just like George Romero was always independent, and just like all the guys who were doing knockoffs of Tarantino were already kind of wanting to make those kinds of weird movies and just got weirder and were going to be compared to him nonetheless. I mean, it's inevitable. You can have all your Jim Jarmusch's and eat your cake too, and then eventually, now in today's climate, I've seen some filmmakers joke that indie really doesn't exist anymore because the minute you make it big, like at Sundance or whatever, you're now mainstream independent. You're gonna be asked to do again a Blumhouse terror flick next Halloween, or you know, like you saw with Ryan Coogler. Now he has the helm Black Panther, and his style is totally different from what we saw in even mainstream blockbusters like Creed or his first feature, Fruitvale Station. So Jeff
Well, of
Nichols.
course. I mean, it's this idea of like you are. I think someone said working for big budget production companies like Disney, Marvel, Warner Brothers. A lot of the time, you're jumping onto a train,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you're not really doing a lot. It's already going a particular direction. So it's just you can make small tweaks here and there, but you can't change anything.
Indeed. And if you tweak it, then it's basically just not even indie. It's just a mainstream movie that looks like an indie feature. And I mean, you look at Kimberly Pierce with Boys Don't Cry, and Jeff Nichols with Mud, and again, how their features after that so different. And you can't blame them, because I've said it before, I got to pay the bills, and career didn't take off as big as it was when I first took over that festival. And it's a shame that, yes, some of them have, even some of the best ones are now having to even the ones we grew up liking, who are pretty mainstream, now have to direct TV. Linklater's just been fortunate enough. He's stuck to the comedy genre, I think. And I think that's why he's been a little more successful. It's just easier to catch a niche that way with an audience that loves those kinds of movies.
It's really interesting when it comes to Linklater. I'm not necessarily the biggest Linklater fan.
He varies.
But like the Before trilogy, for some reason, clicks in a way that Boyhood didn't click for me. In
all fairness, this isn't 3 hours. So.
Right.
I do see people trying to make the excuse what does or doesn't work. And I'm like, it's either interesting or it doesn't, because there's plenty of movies, in my opinion, that are 3 hours long, and I don't notice that they went that long. Like, I saw Lincoln in the theater. I know some were bored by it. I wasn't bored by it. I like LA Confidential, and that one is pretty taut. And
one of my favorite films is Seven Samurai. So
Seven Samurai. Just about every Kurosawa film. I had the honor of re-seeing Ran in a college studies theater, and I was like, I'd already was a fan of it for years, but seeing it, in a screen, like, that was worth doing that, even though it was for class. Just there's some stuff that you gotta just go for the ride.
And other ones, unfortunately, Boyhood was one of those for me, which is just like a slog. It's just like, all right, what year are we in now? Like, okay.
And I think some of it is just we're getting old, and I'm not saying that it's a good or a bad thing. It's just what it is. I liked a lot of Scorsese's earlier 3 hour epics, like Goodfellas and Last Temptation of Christ, and I did not like The Irishman at all. I thought it was a dull sit that brought nothing new to the genre, but to each their own. And I understand that this is kind of just where we just got to get better at using our words. I know you can use your words, but some people can't, and you just got to say, okay, well, let's come back when we're ready to have a conversation. And this doesn't have to be an argument, guys. It is what it is.
I mean, we're talking about, perspective and preference, really.
Half the time, it just may not land. You don't know why. It's just, it didn't.
And unfortunately, when we start talking about, non-independent films like the Before trilogy with like Marvel, and anytime that we have the marriage of certain fandoms and genre sycophants, for lack of a better word, where they literally have, we call this in sociology a reference group, where these specific characters are a part of their reference group and a part of their identity. And any kind of criticism of those characters, or they're not portrayed in the way that they thought they would, is then taken as a personal attack on that person.
Yeah, people don't even know what overrated means anymore. Half the time they're like, okay, so you're talking smack. I'm like, I didn't say it was bad. I just didn't think it was award-winning. Overrated means doesn't live up to the hype. But yes, because it's still overall is used as a negative connotation most of the time, it generally is often thought of, oh, so you thought it sucked. Like, not saying that. Never said that.
Yeah. And
it's a one-time watch. It's not top 250.
And what I love about the Before trilogy is not only is it quiet, not only is there not a million edits,
Yeah, every
that the
single
camera
minute.
just sort of sits there. You know, it is the small scale story of two people having a moment. And
it's all touching. It's all relevant. You know it's going somewhere. It's not like any other indie person where you're like, I guess this is going somewhere. I'm really distracted by their addiction or just not knowing what's going on. I got to be patient.
well, that and it like everyone, it connects to everyone because I think that everybody has in their life one or a couple of people
Definitely
that
few.
have been in their life only for a moment, but then change their entire perspective on the rest of the world.
That's
And
love in general. It's like,
yeah,
you've opened my world. Now I got to follow you around because I trust you.
and even if Jesse and Celine, there was no other 2 or 3 films. The one reason why that first film connected, I think, because we all know of what could have been with any number of people, right? If I would have just said this to this person, or if I would have, decided to go to that concert, or if I would have decided to, go into that music store at that time or something like that. We all have those stories. And so we put ourselves in Jesse and Celine's position.
1,000%. I wish I could speak that beautifully. It is definitely that at that point. It's like, yeah, I mean, anyone else would want this to be wrapped up in a few minutes. And I'm just like, yeah, no, it's just not how it's going to be. It's just, anyone else, if you knew personally, maybe even you, if you were in this relationship, this would probably end within a few minutes and you'd be going to work, talking smack about them to your coworker. And the movie does kind of establish how they're just uncanny people. They, some of that is just the actors, some of that's just how it's staged. And it's like, yeah, I'm expecting any kind of thing to happen at this point.
Yeah. And like the way in which, well, I love how each film rhymes. So
yeah.
Stuff that is said in part 1, I'll call them part 1, part 2, and part 3.
Yeah, just so we don't confuse anyone. That's a good idea.
Right. So in part 1, they talk about the time traveler, and that's the thing that gets Celine to get off the train to go with Jesse. And the time traveler comes back again in part 3 as a olive branch to try to mend smooth things over.
That's a good find. I didn't think of that. I was thinking mainly on the locations they've been to that they say, hey, I want to hang out in a hotel. And so, they're in a hotel, I think by part 2.
Part 3. Part 3,
yes. Yeah. Part 3 does that. And it's just interesting how they do a good use of just over the shoulder shots and just enclosed private conversation, and they do the voyeurism in a way where it doesn't feel sleazy or even necessarily like you shouldn't be listening to it. It's just it's kind of the wall's point of view, for lack of better words, not so much a ceiling or a shoulder point of view. It's mainly just like, yeah, here they are. They're having a conversation. You shouldn't be paying attention to this, but you are, because we're the filmmaker and we say so. And like you say, they don't even mount the camera around too much to where, dollies can sometimes take you out of it or other stuff like that. And if it's handheld, it's really well done, really shoulder mounted pretty well.
Yeah. And there's no tricks either,
No.
right? Like you're talking about, there's like,
very raw lighting.
I don't even think there's like, there might be a crane shot somewhere.
If it was just, that was what they spent visual effects on, digitally erased that crane that got in the way by accident, because we're not going to retake that excellent conversation that lasts 10 minutes.
I mean, like,
and you're not looking at your watch either. You're never like, oh, okay, this is great. So I think it is a rare kind of magnetism that glues you to the screen, because there's so many other movies that are dialogue based, and some of them backfire because they're based on plays that just aren't necessarily ready for the cinema, or they're reliant on the actor to carry it, and that can vary too, especially if you don't care for that actor.
Right.
Or
And
don't think it's strong enough to just, last 90 minutes. So there's some movies that can do that and others that can't get away with it. And this one, it didn't need to really pay any bag of tricks because everyone's interested in this. There's I would be damned if I heard years later it's like, I don't like that chapter of my life. Like, these actors could have even been romantically attached in real life, and they would have said, "Oh, that was a rough chapter," but I don't think they would have regretted this experience. This is a special kind of film series that shows, just make intriguing conversation. And like you say, they did talk about stuff that no one ever wants to think about in a breakup, but they kind of establish. No, they don't kind of. They really do establish is like, when they were very young, 20 somethings when they first met. And then now they're both got to be in their 50s by now, right? And
now they're in their 50s. When they did Midnight, they were like 41 or 40, 42, somewhere around there.
No one could believe it.
And what I love, when you look at all three of these films in any order, what you realize is that Jesse is a romantic playing a cynic.
Yes.
And Celine is a cynic playing at a romantic.
Yeah, and by movie 2, they're having kind of opposite viewpoints, and then by movie 3, they're totally opposite of where they were first movie. And so, yeah, I agree. Is like these movies would totally benefit from multiple rewatches if you got the time. And
the middle chapter is only 80 minutes. There's no fat on that film.
No,
it is streamlined to a point, and it was all shot at the same hours of the day for 2 weeks. So literally it is no artificial lighting. It is all natural lighting of like late afternoon. Well, it's mid-afternoon to late afternoon for like 2 weeks. It's brilliant. The second film is perfection.
I believe so, because like I said, movie 1 you wouldn't have known about had you not seen movie 2. Movie 1, I think that's just it. Like, all these movies, they could only have been made in the era they were made in, because movie 1 is total 90s movie. Just credits are slower, it's more upbeat. There's a lot more music montages with no dialogue being said and them holding hands. And yeah, movie 2, it's like any other sequel that was made in the 2000s, except it's indie scale. And but I do concur. It does try to be its own special kind of movie instead of try to just ape the first movie like so many sequels do.
The interesting thing about from 1 to 2, there's so many other films like movie 1, Before Sunrise, because it's just one guy backpacking through Europe or going through like traveling, getting on like romantic adventures and these sorts of things.
Any other movie, it would have been a private school boy exploring his sexuality, or some shit like that. It would have been something like that. Instead, it's two, young adults who are slowly figuring out what they want to do with their life.
And when you get to the sequel, it's like you had this experience that was such an imprint on your personality. Where are you now? And there's there's a shot in Sunset where he is talking about her at the beginning of the film. He's talking about her to the press. And there is a shot from Before Sunrise, the first movie, of Celine, and then it immediately cuts to Julie Delpy in Before Sunset. It's one right after the other, and it is fantasy into reality in that moment, and that's brilliant.
That's a good note, because it is one of those. There's so much to analyze in this movie, and it's not to be cute. Nowadays when people do that, they make more effort if it's just an Easter egg. And it is a cool shot because, like you say, it's it's just very, it's a love letter to how far this whole thing has come, instead of just, we did it because we could.
And it was, if what I remember from looking at like interviews, that it was, they wrote themselves into a corner in part two that they
I bet.
ultimately had to do part three, or at least that's how they felt.
Because, yeah, it's a lot to take in. And like you say, there's so many ways it could have gone wrong. And it does just a good job of never having to explore anything else or worry about everything all adding up. Like, because it does add up. Like, what's working is it's on the relationship. Any other filmmaker would just worry, oh, okay, are my leads going to behave? It's like, no, that's not what this is about. This is about just so much. This is about, again, these two individuals who weren't the same by the time they got to the end of their life. And yeah, movie 4 would probably wreck it. It just would probably, it wouldn't wreck what came before, but it would just be just very unnecessary. Because
I think we've moved past, like, each of them was separated by 9 years, so it would have had to have come out like by the end of this year,
right,
if there was, and it's not in production as far as I know, unless they're doing it in secret.
yeah, whatever they're thinking, I wish them the best. Because I mean, you also just want a natural sequel, and I think that's just it. These are all so natural. They loved what they got, so they recreated it. And instead of just, well, we got a claim and we made money on it, so let's do it. And it's like, no, don't do it just to do it. Do it because you legit want to make something of it.
Yeah, and the what I love is the way in which these particular films play on our cultural and social norms.
That's
That
practically what they're doing half the time. They're like, what is this where we make love? It's like so much of that snarkiness that is like, I think that's why it found its place, or it was like, ah.
it's that sort of idea that, like, what kind of person you are depending upon how you react to Jesse and Celine.
Bingo.
It's sort of like, they even talk about this in the beginning of Before Sunset, where he has the 3 or 4 journalists, and he says, well, it's all about how you deal with romance. And he points to one journalist and he says, you don't believe they got together. He points to another one, you absolutely believe that they got together. And the person in the middle was like, and you're not sure, but you hope so.
And it has the good layers of a good joke. Like, it's just one by one by one, and boom, and there you go. And like you say, it does leave a lot to just kind of be able to do that, because not everyone can do that. There would have been other people where it's like, okay, that's well acted, but that scene went on too long, and it's very well timed. You can tell that, like you say, they prepped as good as they could.
And I think you need to have an audience that's patient, and that's what these 3 films require. They require individuals to be patient with the storytelling as it's going to unfold.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of the deal, where they tried to make sure had a sense of awareness, like, because everyone's got an ego, but I had a sense that they had a good idea of, I feel like we're just going on a little too long. I'm kind of losing a sense of what the scene hopes to end. And I think they're just, again, they're actors first. And every good actor always wants to know where a scene is going. And if it's, where am I in the scene? And some people don't care. They'll just say the lines on time because that they already aced the acting. But there's others who generally is like, where am I? Okay, I feel like I'm losing you and everyone else is lost.
Absolutely. And that's where it helps that the principal actors are also the writers. for the majority. They didn't get a credit on the first film, even though they rewrote the script.
Did they get a producing credit at least?
They didn't until 2 and 3. In 2 and 3, they were both producers and writers, and I believe they got nominated for a Writers Guild Award and an Oscar, I think, for part 2. Sunset.
Okay, that's solid enough. I just hate it when, like you say, they're not given due credit, and half the time it's just like maybe 1 or 2 edits. It's nothing, but there are other times where it's like, yeah, no, he dedicated a bunch.
Yeah. And as I was watching these films, like, it's really interesting to look at this from like a gender perspective.
Oh, good point.
Because there's no way if Jessie was presented as female, would she even offer to have someone get off the train with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that wouldn't even be a thing.
No, so true, because there's so many other people who would take this wrong, and it's very clear all parties agree with degrees of this, because they're mentioning so many key points that anyone else would be like, oh, you pushed my buttons. And like you say, it's very careful, it's very meticulous, it's very much about, it's like we're having a conversation, and because it's just so natural, it's just so evolving, they're never doing the same thing even in every scene, to where you're open, and by the time when they're all just flat out disagreeing, saying, how the fuck did we fall in love with each other, it's just so genuine. You're just like, that's how it's all been. Just the love ran out. It took 10 years, but fuck, here we are.
I mean, my favorite, the one thing that was the most real in the third film, when you're talking about Midnight, is that they're in the middle of this fight, and Celine walks away. She goes out of the hotel room, and in the most real moment of the entire film, she comes back in. She slams her purse on on the table and
that
says,
was so great.
And she's like, "You think you're winning?" Like that phrase is just like, yes, everybody has been in partnerships where you are still together and you're having this cheeky moment, and that just diffuses everything. It's like, no, we're still fighting.
You're right. It's not going anywhere else.
Yeah.
Oh man. And like you say, this isn't easy to talk about. Anyone else would have been like, oh no, this is not a formula. This sounds terrible. That's depressing.
Well, a lot of people who left the film with the third film, they didn't feel good. A lot of couples that went into the film expecting that comedy, that repartee, that
they must not have been paying attention. They must have just liked, hey, that was pleasant. It's like,
well, yeah, it was that was what they were expecting, and then they came out of the theater and they were like, oh, that was a little too real.
What can you do?
Like, so many couples have had to have, after that film, said to each other, we've had that fight. That fight has been had in so many different bedrooms.
I mean, I can imagine what else could happen. I mean, because it's also just a little more, it's tricky, and you kind of admire them for doing something that tricky, because there's so many others who just would want to just kind of get too cute for their own good. Okay, they'll have 5 more arguments, and then finally they'll kiss and make up. It's like, no, that's not where it's going.
It is the very realness of Celine remaining topless while they're fighting.
At first, you think they're going to engage in dirty talk. It's like, no, they're going beyond this even.
Right, and it's this thing of like, we usually in film, we only see women naked in a very sexual way, that it's only for
It's once again a
a
raw
sexual
way.
scene or sexual pleasure or these sorts of things. And it's very real to be like, oh, no, you said something that pissed me off, and we are going to stand, I don't care how I look, we're going to stand here and we're going to have it out, because we are no longer in a sexual situation. And
No.
you can literally see that in the way that it's shot and the way that they're positioned, and that even though she is topless, it is not sexy at all. It was sexy 5 minutes ago. It
Right.
is not sexy. It is not sexy now.
Oh, totally. And they did a good job at diffusing that, because there's so many others who probably wouldn't be up to that level, wouldn't be able to confront that. And
Yeah.
again, just rare kind of filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how in the lead up to that fight in Midnight, they both try not to fight, which is such what couples do, is like, you try not to fight, and then someone says something, or someone does something that
or they try too hard and it just doesn't sound sincere, even though it is sincere. And there's several moments where it's like, I'm on their side and then I'm on the other side, and then it's like, whoa, tell me more, I don't know about this problem that you're having. And so we, the viewer, I mean, only, like you say, the most single-minded person, and then to even expect what you're expecting and still be taken aback, they're just underplaying the effectiveness of film. There are some movies that can do this, because there's other movies which are try too hard to be manipulative, or try their damnedest to just kind of just have an argument, but overall you really don't know what the closing statement really sufficed. And they don't even really get on a speech so much. They're all very, you just feel like there's even barriers up against every single dialogue piece. It's like, okay, now I'm on highway 20, now I'm on highway 65, and now I'm at the end of the line, and I want to turn right back to where I came from, and oh no, we can make this work. Let's go back up the highway 50. Okay, screw it, we're just gonna have to go back all the way home. Angry.
Well, I think the issue of, like, people who have seen a lot of movies like you and I have, I'm sure, we know when a film is being emotionally manipulative.
The music plays too early, the flags start waving, there's something else that just feels off. And
yeah, it's like, oh, do you want me to cry now? Now is when you want me to cry. Okay, I feel that.
The worst part is when you watch a comedy in the theaters and you're the only one laughing, or everyone else is laughing. You're like, seriously? That's funny? And it gets even more annoying when you see beloved filmmakers do mistakes. You know, I've seen it, all of them do it. Brian De Palma gives away the ending in freaking Carlito's Way. And you're like, why? For this otherwise good movie, you did the first role in the book. Don't give away too much. I've seen Antoine Fuqua get a little too confusing in some of his otherwise well-acted action and crime blockbusters. And so it's just annoying, because you kind of almost want to get in the studio and editing room yourself and engage for stuff that's otherwise working. And there's other times where it's like, you know, it's just not my fight to have on. This is part of the fun experience, but I can't say I'm frustrated with any of these ones. I can't, because like you say, there's some movies I never was crazy about in Linklater's catalog, and there's others I will always see. I will always rewatch School of Rock. I think that's like the best of his mainstream work, because there's so many other movies where, like you say, that's a Sundance favorite, but that's hardly old school indie.
Right.
Just I feel like Linklater, in many ways, you can tell me if I'm off on this. I can't find anything. I'm sure if I were to ask him, he might say he's a fan. Do you know if he's a fan of John Cassavetes by any chance?
I think so. I don't know what his favorite Cassavetes film is.
It would probably have to be one of the lighter ones, because I can't imagine it being a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Because
I mean, though there is some shot similarities between the before films and Mikey and Nicky. Right. If you look at the way in which they're structured, in the way in which some of the shot composition that Elaine May actually did. I mean, Elaine May basically stole that film from the from the production company, and like bravo to her. Like my
Yeah.
God,
Someone
but
had to
like,
do it.
but there is this sort of like subtle romance that you could make a comparison between Mikey and Nikki and Celine and Jesse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely get a lot of that. Because all characters, most movies try to do kind of like a typical TV show, sitcom, or crime show will do, where they're all one side of one real. At this point, it's not even a coin; it's one giant balloon, and they're like a quarter inch of each one. But it's interesting in that, uh, basically, kind of like Cassavetes was filming his actor pals having conversations and then adding a few scenes to make it all cohesive.
Yeah, that's
Or
like in Husbands, right?
right. He and Gina Rollins were married, and just artists first before people. And I just feel like, yeah, it just these actors legit loved each other. And like any good actor, when your storyline in your mind ends, regardless of what's on screen, where you are in the whole deadline. And I'm sure they were just always talking with Linklater saying, hey, we had such a fun time. What should we do together? And I'm sure it was inevitable. We got to make a follow-up continuation of this story. And
yeah, and Sunset is this sort of rekindling. It is what should, like, I think Ethan Hawke said, the first film is all about what could be. Second film is all about what should have been, and then the third film is all about what is.
Okay, well, that's a different way to look at it now, and that's even better. But
Yeah,
it's cool though to know that, again, just something like this can be so outlined and it can make an impact with audiences instead of just feeling too just by the number.
oh no, yeah, and I really I would like to think that there's still room for films like this, or that
I would
the
hope, because I
but
know audiences are getting sick and not all of them on board with everything. But yeah, you would think by now something would come out.
unless they're gonna go, the newer ones are gonna go direct to streaming. I would,
It's true, because they just don't want to take a risk. And
yeah.
uh,
I mean,
man,
yeah, but this, I mean, these three films will all always have a sort of special place in my heart as one of my top favorite trilogies. Obviously,
no,
for
that's a good point, because there's so many other movies where, I mean, on that same list, I was looking at them. They had Lord of the Rings, they had Dark Knight. I'm like, I'm sorry, only like 2/3 of the Dark Knight trilogy. And then they had a few others where I'm like, it's technically, if another sequel to that is made and is actually like, it's going to be a quadrilogy or syncology. Sorry.
yeah. I mean, the issue is that, like, that's where we get into the issue of like legacy sequels, of like
Well,
trying to right the wrong of the previous film, you know. Uh
and then actually be its own thing, and then all anyone can think of, well, at least it didn't suck like the last one. And it's like, it gets too distracting, because many movies unfortunately are still rushed into production with barely a script. And
yeah.
half the time, I don't know why it's even harder to do, especially if it is action or sci-fi, where most of that is just endless shots. It's nothing to do with the script itself. So I think a lot of it just gets too compacted by, again, just people overthinking things, and no money will be good enough. So eventually just people sign on to stuff they're just not ready to do.
And when you compare it to these three films, where the first film and the second film each has shots of either where the couple will be or where they have been.
Establishing and then rebuilding, rekindling, and then going to a whole different location you've never seen before. And again, it always is out in the cold, no music, no dialogue, and then they start talking again.
And the I was really interested at the end of the first film when they go through all of the shots or all of the places they were throughout the entire film, this time in the morning, in the daytime.
Good.
There
good note.
is there's a shot of the two wine glasses and the empty wine bottle in the park. And I'm just fascinated with this this evidence that you were there, right? Evidence that you existed in that moment, and the leftover wine glasses and the wine bottle signify that they were there and that they are gone.
That's a good point, because the glass is half full in this case. It's just abandoned.
Do you think that Jesse gave that money to that bartender for that bottle of wine? Do you think he actually paid him off, or did he forget about it?
That's a good question. I don't want to say it's like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction where it's left to the viewer's imagination. I don't think it's that bad, but I am almost tempted to ask, Ethan Hawke is like, what happened to the bottle? I'm sure he's got an answer. I can't imagine he doesn't, but at the same time, it is one of those like, it could go either way, but I do feel like it ultimately doesn't matter. But at the same time, it is a good note on how, again, like he's so focused on winning her back that he probably wouldn't be in the right mood to, tip and be a good customer.
And that all that, like the turnaround and the sinking feeling that you get when you realize he did show up 6 months later in the beginning of Sunset.
They're together, and you realize, oh, they actually haven't been together.
Yeah, and that he, that he,
they look happy, but they're not happy.
No, I mean, it's that
they want to be together, but they kind of don't at the same time, because they've had a rough go of it. And it's just like you say, it's very organized, because you have enough to fill it all in, instead of, again, excess. It's like, all right, you're over explaining.
And the way in which the film lets you learn about them through their dialogue or through their conversation is something that is both a plot point, but yet it's part of the ambiance of the film. It's part of the texture of the film.
Texture is a good way of putting it, because there's so many other movies that focus on the look and not the feel. And again, they leave it to the actor. There are so many just calculations that just make you feel, whoa, I am in a different place now. And we were in the same room a minute ago, but it feels like a different room, just because the tension's just getting a little off kilter. What's wrong, guys?
Yeah, especially in the third film. I mean, you can feel a difference when, and it all, like I said, it all rhymes with the first film, because in the first film, Jesse says, well, maybe if we spent all of our time together, you'd get sick of me. And then in the second film, Celine says, maybe we're only good in short bursts, years apart. And
man,
it's
some big stuff. A lot of stuff to just kind of hang on to too. We're just like, anyone else would be like, don't leave me hanging. And it's like, I kind of have to be left hanging, because there's just no way they're going to get along at this point. And at the same time, I mean, it's not like it was meant to fail. It totally wasn't meant to fail, but it's just a very natural progression. And taking all that time off, like you say, really was complimentary. I can't imagine it going on for so long to where, you lose track of everything.
Right, and you don't want it to run into the ground, uh, especially so. So, are you of the mind of by the end of midnight that they are broken up? They're not. It's not salvageable.
It's tough to say. I think, yeah, at this point he's not as cute with his words as he used to be, and she's very dissatisfied with many things. Or, and the irony is, he's too cynical, and yes, she does sound dissatisfied even when she's actually satisfied. She just that they're not ready to make any kind of change. But I do feel like they're always going to keep running into each other and begging to get back together or think about each other, even though they don't want to be thinking about each other, because love it has a way of just doing mad things. And I love how something like this can do something so drastic without, having to have it be too Shakespearean or just like, of course, by formula's sake, they're split up, but they're gonna get back just because why not? And
Well, I like that. I like that idea that they're in each other's orbit. They may not necessarily be together, but there is
they might
some
be talking smack behind their back. God damn you, I love you so much.
right. And it is this sort of like their attraction, and something always brings them together, but they may not always be together. That they're two people that need to have each other in their lives in some capacity, but it doesn't have to be romantic, or it doesn't have to be romantic long term. It can be platonic. It can be it can be like a fling, or these sorts of things.
Oh, totally.
I think we all have individuals in our lives that do that enter and exit our orbit.
I just had a friend who just got his CDL license. His wife works from home and wants him to take days off where they're apart from each other. And what's funny is he's very sociable, but sometimes gets to be too much. So I thought that was interesting when I heard that report. There are some people, they need me time. And I think before we had all these mental health podcasts and everything, everyone was just really bad at communicating or understanding needs or identifying it. They just thought,
in the 1940s and the 1950s, that's why everybody drank all the time. It was all self-medication.
Went to a psych ward, was dissatisfied, even though they had literally the world. And other than that, yeah, I can't find many even bad reviews about this. I'm sure, if anything, it's people who just don't like anything really meaningful.
Yeah, you scratch the surface on some reviews and it's like, no, this hits something in you that you're not willing to deal with at this time.
This reminds me of my ex.
Right. And I'm going to take it out on this movie.
Totally. So Roger Ebert with movie 2 noted how movie 1 was a remarkable celebration of the fascination of good dialogue, but the second one was better, perhaps because the characters are older and wiser, perhaps because they have more to lose or win, and because the actors wrote the dialogues themselves. The Los Angeles Times noted that with movie 2, there's a deeper, truer work of art than the first, and that keeps faith with American cinema at its finest. And that's interesting because, yeah, movie 1, the New York Times and Washington Post just both basically note that the characters are interesting and it doesn't feel like a gazillion other movies you would have seen at the cinema at that time. And I'm like, that's interesting because and I think that just says a lot about how far we've come in cinema, because it used to be movies were kind of word of mouth. People weren't necessarily always listening to critics unless it had made just so many worst of the year lists, or you came across it on cable and you're like, wow, wonder what there was in that to make anyone sign up for this seeping pile of trash.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be interesting seeing how these age, because I am seeing, everyone do a favorites of which one is their preferred one. I don't have a preferred one, really. I thought I did, and now I really don't, because they're all one giant oyster now.
Yeah, it is a whole. Like all three of them have their particular place, but in terms of my individual enjoyment, um, it would be my ranking would be top to bottom, 2, 3, 1. I
Okay.
think on my Letterboxd, I gave movie 2 Sunset 5 stars, movie 3 4.5 stars, and then movie 1 4 stars. Like that was my ranking.
Nice. Right.
Yeah,
And uh yeah, we'll have to share each other's letterboxes.
yeah, absolutely. It is well, I mean, it's the Sociologist Dojo on the letterbox. You can find that real easy. My top 4 faves right now on the letterboxed list are Seven Samurai, Akira, Mandy, and When Harry Met Sally.
All right. Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So, do you, in terms of these 3 films aging, do you think that they will be more favorable in the future, or
I can't see them going away just because Linklater's such a big name, and people are still gonna, I think, because it's in the Criterion Collection, that's kind of a go-to. Everyone wants legit film that's like actually honored. That they're getting tired of going to Rotten Tomatoes and seeing such divide where there's a 70% user score and a 30% critic rating,
Mhm.
and just that 30 to 40% subtraction is just enough to just make people say, I need someone who I can trust. Kind of like how you're going to go to probably Ultimate Action Movies if you want to see a good action movie that you haven't heard of that's got some big and older names. Bloody Disgusting is, and other, and Screen Rant have kind of been attracting a lot of horror guys. And
Mhm.
yeah, with these, I mean, I think many sites, I mean, Total Film especially elaborated on them a bunch, and I can definitely see a lot of them just making so many just uh, indie comedy drama favorites that inevitably are going to just be like, they're always going to be ranked in that set series. And I seriously have not encountered anyone who just like thought this was meh, just like didn't give a shit.
Well, I
It,
mean, what leg would they have to stand on other than their own wrong opinion?
right. I had seen maybe parts of this, I guess, when I was 14. I didn't give it any attention, but I just knew I would probably be discovering it later on when I got to that mature level where I actually wanted to see something more gripping. But, I could even see younger teens getting into this, if their parents want to watch it and then just say, hey, I need to explain anything to you. They're not even that kind of movie where it'd be awkward to even necessarily see with relatives necessarily,
And
like other
it'd be
films.
interesting to do like a longitudinal analysis of this, of like watch all 3 films in your 20s, watch all 3 films in your 30s, and then watch all 3 films in your 40s.
Oh, so challenge is on, guys. Who's up for it?
Yeah, absolutely me. I did that. I watched it in my 20s, in my 30s, and my 40s. And I love Midnight more now in my 40s than I did when I watched it in my 30s.
Right. And there's just things that you pick up that you don't really think are over exaggerated until you're of the age.
Exactly. Exactly. Like you think them in
I'm
their
my
40s are
30s.
being unreasonable until you're in your 40s and be like, no, I've said that exact same thing.
1,000%. I'm in my 30s now, and now I totally value my time compared to the 20 something guy who was like, whatever goes.
Yep.
What happens. And now it's like, I can't afford whatever happens.
Right. Like, I can't do to my body what I was doing to my body in my 20s.
Even before COVID, a little something.
Absolutely. Oh, man.
Well, this has been a delight having you on here, and we'll definitely get you on some other filmmaker chats.
Anytime. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
1,000%. You have anything that you want to plug?
Sure. I host, and I'm the writer of the Sociologist Dojo, a blog and podcast that analyzes film and popular culture from the sociological perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a sociologist. I have a master's degree in sociology, so I try to blend together two of my passions, the study of society and film culture. And so then I jam these two together. My blog can be found, it's the Sociologist Dojo at www.thesociologistdojo.blogspot.com. And my podcast is on the Libsyn network or section. And you can find that through my Twitter handle at the Sociologists. And then my pinned tweet is access to the podcast. You're going to need to use the RSS feed, and then you can plug that into your podcast catcher of choice.
There you go.
So, thank you for reaching out. Thank you for having me, and I can't wait to do this again.
You know it, and we try our best to also always tackle someone who is like, hey, it's not going to just be an ego stroke, and we're just going to actually legit dive into make sense of why we have always just found this person just so favorable. And it's just not everyone can do it. There's plenty who can tell you for days, I love it. And it's like, but why? It just works. And so you want to always, just show an evolution, especially with where someone can actually evolve as a person and as an entertainer, and you also want to see if they can actually just be why they make these riveting films, because it's not always personal. Sometimes they do a great movie and it was, for a paycheck because they can do it in their sleep, like Coppola did.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't know if I'll forgive Coppola, because if you go to there was an episode I did on the Godfather trilogy, and like the reissue of Godfather 3, where he said that he fixed it and he didn't do anything, and he did nothing with it. He did the same thing with The Outsider or The Outsiders. Yeah. And I just felt ripped off. I was like, you did nothing. You changed the title and you had like a different introduction. And that was it for the third Godfather film. Everything about those performances and stuff were still problematic. You didn't change anything. And
I think you'd like his new version of Apocalypse Now. He took out the stuff that was criticized in the director's cut, and then he added some more new scenes and remastered the whole thing. It's never looked better.
Well, I haven't caught that one yet, but absolutely.
He did the Cotton Club as well, so now we definitely need some Coppola revisitation.
Yeah, I will definitely put that on the list.
Oh, I will see you back here soon, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll return after these messages.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gavsey, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
We let things pile up in the DVR. We add them to our queues. We wait for the DVDs and Blu-rays. We time shift. The Time Shifters Podcast. Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, superheroes, comedy, action, film, television, maybe some not-so-current events. Find us on iTunes or at timeshifterspodcast.com.
Cool thing about Blind Knowledge is we are in multiple countries. We are worldwide all across the globe. We are in the US. We are in the UK. We are in Canada, Germany, India, Japan. We're in Australia, y'all. BlindKnowledge.com. Now back to the feature presentation.
Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Naruto, all things that we love, all manga that were originally published in the legendary magazine Weekly Shonen Jump.
But not every series can run for 300 chapters and have a hit anime. This is David.
This is Jordan.
We're the hosts of Shonen Flop. Each episode we look at manga that ran in Jump that didn't quite make it.
We discuss what it did wrong, what it did right, how the series could have turned itself around, and ultimately, was it a flop or not?
We're on all your favorite podcast apps, and you can find us at shonenflop.com.
Keep on flopping, floppers.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up review show.